Good afternoon and welcome to episode 3 of BuiltPlace's Housing Conversations. Today we will be talking about the future of home and work in light of the massive disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Yolanda Barnes, Chair of UCL's Bartlett Real Estate Institute, but first we have housing and construction analyst Brian Green to talk us through some of the statistics on home working.
Okay, the first slide really is to try and determine in as loose a way as we can, or as quick a way as we can, the link between the pandemic and home working. We can just assert that it's happened because everybody's talking about it, but actually this was quite an interesting way of doing it. And what we found was there was quite a remarkable correlation as we used the word coronavirus because that's what people were using it before COVID. So we used that word and we tracked it against working from home. And as you can see, there's quite a strong correlation there. But what's interesting as well is as we're coming down the curve and interest is waning slightly, there's a sudden spike up in the interest in working from home. And I think that tends to correlate with as people were talking about the end of lockdown and what that might mean. Anyways, probably the best thing next is to look at where we are with actual home working numbers and the trends that are happening. Now, the definitions of home working are obviously blurred between the lines because it's not all people working with their computers at home. So for instance, if you look at the blue line on the top, which is people using home as a base, that's quite a large number of people. So you might imagine there, for instance, construction workers as being self-employed construction workers who work from home and go to wherever they go to. So that's that kind of thing. The red bar is those people working at home or working from their grounds. Now, some of that will be mixed. So people working from the grounds or building might well be a shopkeeper. And also there'll be other people that use their grounds, etc., in that kind of way. So it might be artisans or whatever. But we've included those because there might be the occasional shed worker who ticks the box saying they work in the grounds. So what we've got here, and we can see from those that are the broader group of people working from home, is a steady rise over the whole period, and it's accounted for most of the rise in overall working from home. So just to give you a few numbers, if we start at the beginning, which I think is 1999, and what we've got there is you've got about 3.6%, I think, in that red band, which is the sort of working at home or in the grounds group. And then if you take the whole thing, you've got about 11%, something like that, working from home in the broader definition. And as we move forward, we get up to people that are using the home as a base and working from home at about 14-ish%, something like that, with about the biggest growth and the most substantial growth has been in the people working at home or in their grounds, which has risen to about 6% of the working population, which, as you can see from the numbers, is quite considerable. And that most of that change has happened in the last 10 years or so, because it's gone from about 4% to about 6%. So that's quite a substantial rise in that. And a lot of that will be from sort of people using the internet, etc. So what we're seeing is a steady upward trend. So if we look at the next slide, but when we're talking about home working, again, it gets a bit fuzzy. And what's useful about this, now this is data that was brought out by the ONS. I think it was for the Cabinet Office, in fact, requested this to get a feel for people working at home. This comes from the annual population survey. And what we see there is that about 5% they've got for the people that are working at home. But interestingly, what you get is you get another group of people that clearly work at home quite regularly, that being they worked in the previous week. And if we widen it even more, the numbers of people that have worked at home over the period is extended out to about 27%, which is quite substantial. And just to get a feel for how the UK sits and some ideas about what things might be driving working from home in the UK. What we can see here is some stats that are produced by the European Commission. And what's interesting, I'm struggling to see it on my screen, but hopefully you can see better than me, that the that we sit below the EU average on this, and with around sort of 5% ish working from home. Whereas if you compare that with, say, the Netherlands, which has got over 14% of its people working, its workforce working from home, you can see there's a substantial difference. Now, I was interested to find out why that might be. And as I understand it, from the various bits and bobs, what you've got is in the Netherlands, you've got a slightly more relaxed you've got more relaxed employers, and people are more trusting of their workforce. They also have a lot more part-time workers there within their system. They've got much more kind of liberal arrangements around how they work, and that probably accounts for part of the difference between the UK and the Netherlands, which suggests, by reversing that maybe our employers have not been in the past as willing to let people work from home as, say, the Dutch. And that may well have been a constraint on what might be regarded as a more natural level of working from home. And certainly if you look back to much of the literature, I think that's what you'll find. So that gives you a broad outline, hopefully, of the stats and what the stats are saying. If we were to, just on this last slide, actually, if we were to extend that to older people, what you'd find is that all of those numbers would go up, because a lot of people, as they sort of retire from the office, as it were, or wherever, do to start working from home. So there's a lot of older people working from home, which I think is a point worth noting.
Thanks, Brian. That was really useful. Quick overview of what's been going on with the stats, and so we've brought it into the Zoom call here. And Yolanda, thanks for joining us. And so there was some, Brian, you pointed me at some statistics suggesting that about a third of workers have worked from home. ONS had put out a survey, and so clearly there's been a big increase in the last few months. Now, Yolanda, is this the new normal? Are we all working from home, and is it the end of city offices?
I think we're on a curve that's probably at the moment far from normal, and goodness knows where we'll end up with normal. But I think we've got to remember that there is a limit to how many people actually can work from home in the sense that we're talking about now. I mean, broadly speaking, it's white collar workers who use computers, and what I am interested in, though, is an even broader sort of definition of working from home. I noticed the other day something being delivered. We're having deliveries all over the place. But it was delivered by a guy in his own car who had clearly been contracted in a completely new workforce, as there's huge demand for in the logistics world for new types of delivery, and they're just desperate for anyone. And I noticed he had his wife or girlfriend with him. They were combining it obviously with a jaunt out to the countryside or something, which means that actually, are we looking at a situation where home-based working, even beyond the sort of white-collar sector, might become more normal? I could actually envisage a situation where workers in the logistic industry actually are organised more around sort of old-fashioned guilds, sort of self-employed workers banding together to become available to whoever needs deliveries and so forth. There's a potentially a whole new sort of home-based workforce out there, and I think the way we have to consider it is not just sort of what the needs are from the office owner, sort of investors' point of view, or indeed the boss's sort of point of view, and thinking about purely office working, but actually a new type of geography where people are based very much more, I think, in neighbourhoods, and where we work is our neighbourhood, not necessarily that CBD. I really think the future of the central business district is under threat here. And the cities that do best out of this sort of revolution that we seem to be going through will actually be those that have really viable, healthy, good neighbourhoods in which people can not just work or live, but also visit, stay, play, make, learn all the other things we do in places. So it requires really a very significant sort of mindset change in the real estate industry, away from single-use boxes toward a much more holistic sort of consideration of land and neighborhood as the asset. And I think this is what COVID's done, is just accelerate what probably would have happened over the course of the first half of the 21st century in any case. Brian showed us, people wanting to work from home was already rising anyway. I think the gene is out of the bottle now. I think everybody who can probably will want to spend more time at home to do their work.
I think if I'm looking at it, say, from a creation of the built environment perspective or a construction perspective, one of the parallels I would look to is the transition between the industrial and the commercial. That transition and that transformation, that repurposing of the built environment was quite dramatic, and you can see it in all of the figures. The numbers of people in manufacturing went down, people in services went up. That transition was relatively easy, because you knock down factories and you put shopping centres or offices or whatever. That was quite an easy transformation, relatively speaking. What I think we're looking at is something much more complicated, because there's much more of a social element, which I think you're alluding to.
Yeah.
In the whole thing. What I would say, though, is that for a lot of employers, and I suspect they have been resistant, an awful lot of them, I think, will have seen this as a massive experiment. You've got about, in one way or another, 40% of the workforce working from home, either about a third of them constantly working from home, and another group working from home and the office. And I think that's been an experiment, and I think they're going to come out of it thinking triple bottom line. They're going to think, well, on the social side, they're going to think flexible working. That's a good thing. That's a big tick box in my gender equality, flexible working commitments. Environmental, well, I'll be spending less on energy, using less energy, etc. So that's a good economic. That's a good environmental one. And the economic one will be quite simply, I'm spending less on my offices. So I think there's an awful lot of things that they would like, and what's not to like from their point of view. And I think, and you can then add to that any residual fears they might have over the resilience of their operations should there be another pandemic, etc. That would play into it, so they would have the systems there. And most of the machinery has been tested and found pretty reliable. It's not brilliant, but it's pretty reliable to allow a big shift that way. So I think that is the turning point for me. I think it's an attitudinal shift by a lot of employers. That's certainly the noises that I'm picking up.
Yeah, I think the employers are perhaps underestimating how much this is going to cost to permanently set your workforce up with the right equipment. I mean, I'm looking into a laptop now. If I don't get my big screen back for my data, I'm going to be pretty miffed soon. I think also I think this is additionality. Certainly as long as the COVID threat lasts. After all, those central offices, which we might say get together with our teams in once a week or twice a week, are going to have to be at lower density. So actually space requirements, you're not going to make a saving on space, at least in the short term. I think there's an additionality. I think what employers are going to find is that to remain competitive and attract the best employees, they're actually going to have to invest in satellite hubs or whatever you want to call them, in addition to equipping people's homes better. So I think because we I don't know about anybody else, I'm going stir crazy here. I want to go and eavesdrop on somebody else's conversation in a coffee shop or wherever, or I just love to interact with people who I'm not directly working with, but I just want to hear what's going on. And I think a lot of us are like that, and we can all be more productive when we do that sort of thing. So the necessity of a whole new type of working actually starts to emerge, where instead of this sort of constant commuting into a central business district, we need these sort of neighborhood hubs and places where we can do that kind of stuff too.
I think they're really important points, and I completely agree. And I would add into that the need for, people that are more mature. They know they've made their contacts. They understand their business. It's much easier for them to work at home. And I think there is a real danger, and I think you're hinting at it, that delighted by the potential that they may see, some of these CEOs may well be a little over exuberant in terms of the way in which they go, and and I think that's one of the real problems that we might face. I mean, certainly if you look at younger people start of their career, they're going to want to go into an office. They're going to want to meet other people like them. They're going to want to learn. They're going to want to be trained properly. They're going to want to learn from older people as well. So I think the idea that we can just suddenly shoot a 22-year-old out to university into working from home is a little optimistic, because they won't gather all of that other stuff which personal contact actually helps, and certainly in terms of the trust in relationships that you need to conduct business anyway. I think those things could well be overlooked. So I'm completely behind what you're saying.
I think there are already clues as well. I mean, digital technology has enabled us to get hold of anything, anywhere, and everything, everywhere, for a long time now. But there are conglomerations of the most advanced sort of technology, the knowledge hubs, the social spaces have been incredibly important in that world. So we already have clues from the last 10, 20 years, the sort of spaces, especially that young sort of tech savvy millennials and Gen Zs want to be in. This is not a complete revolution. It's evolution that's been catalyzed and accelerated by COVID, I think partly, and it's been one that would have happened had there not been restraints in there in terms of people not allowing it to happen, because I think people could have allowed it to happen a lot more than they have done. So I think the shackles are, if not off, loosened certainly, and I think that will allow it to expand perhaps closer to where we are in the Netherlands, etc. It might be interesting for people to go over there and have a look at what they're doing and how that works for them. I mean, I think there are also some quite big social issues here, because if you are allowing people to work from home more often, maybe come into the office 2 times a week, that alters completely where it is that they live. And that just changes the whole value of land. It means that people will go to places that they will themselves have much more choice over where they live. There'll be less conflict as well with couples, where one person might have to give up their work or whatever because the other person needs to live near work. So all of those things, there's a lot of benefits in those things, I think. That urban dispersal was something that was already in train. We were seeing people in all age groups leaving London in 2018. There was net out migration. The only in-migration into London was actually from overseas. Well, presumably that's going to be on hold. Paris's population was already falling. The same sort of thing was happening in New York as in London. So you have this net out migration, and it's not to the suburbs as it was in the 60s, 70s. It's to good alternative urban locations. So that choice of where you go to, I think, is still quite urban, although there has been an uptick in demand for rural properties and the importance of sort of greenery, outside space, and so on.
I kind of feel a lot of people will still want to have that location. I mean, I think certainly, just coming back to your earlier point, I mean, there's definitely been a change in the commuting patterns to fewer, longer journeys being made. Yeah. So people are doing that kind of, I mean, I'm sure numbers of people will know people that work in London or, for instance, or Manchester, say 2 to 3 days a week, and work from home at other times. So there's that's already underway. I mean, I think another thing that interests me is what kinds of impacts it might have to other local communities if people start choosing to move out to, say, for want of a better phrase, a slightly dowdy market town or something like that, and gentrify it because it's got a good rail link into wherever they primarily work, and it gives them all of the services. Will that push other people out, and will you start getting sort of well-to-do ghettos in towns, or towns becoming a well-to-do ghetto or something. I mean, you're already seeing that kind of thing. So I think there are numbers of other broader social issues that have to be taken on board in terms of social mobility, social mixing, all of those kinds of issues.
Brian, I think that's where a local policy response, and to some extent a national one, matters hugely. How competitive can those dowdy market towns make themselves so that the effect of the gentrification, instead of being concentrated in the center of the global city as it has been over the last 20, 30 years, starts to be more dispersed and starts to benefit some of these sort of less prosperous places. Now, I think that's really down to that local policy response, planning responses, the capability of planning systems, which unfortunately I don't hold out a great deal of hope for, without some change. I think we're really going to be set back by the kind of mentality that sees the high street purely as retail, for example, or a particular building purely as one use. And I think potentially the environment, and trying to relate this to those house builders who might be tuned in, the requirement is most definitely not purpose-built single-use out-of-town business parks for workers. And it's decreasingly homogenous housing estates. The need for mixed-use neighbourhoods has just never been greater. Now, that's a real challenge both to commercial developers and, of course, to house builders.
I think a lot keeps coming down to planning, and I think one of the problems we've got with planning is that planning tends to be restrictions. What we really need is more vision, I think. Yeah. And that's the sort of thing that would be interesting to see people progressing, is a vision of where we want to be. And they could be different visions in different places.
Yeah, absolutely. But it probably means letting go of those sort of 20th century planning use classes and accepting that our streets and places may start to look quite different. I mean, there's huge opportunity there as well. I mean, therein lies the seeds for a kind of a new urban renaissance, a kind of,
and within that context as well, you can start rethinking some of the issues around new towns as well. It's not just about reviving older towns. You can see how might you want to do the new towns in a different light, so that they really are working, living places, much more so than some of the recent publicity might be suggesting there.
Absolutely. I mean, there's recent, I think there's increasing public concern about how car dependent we're making new places, whether they're called garden villages, garden towns, garden cities, or whatever. We really have to, I keep saying that the digital age of the city actually potentially looks much more like the first age of city, where the priority is pedestrians, then cyclists, then the internal combustion engine, and we have to start making streets instead of building roads.
But I definitely think, just coming back to it, I definitely think that what this suggests is we do need vision, because if we don't have vision, we're going to build an awful lot of stuff that's going to be around for a long time, and it's not going to be as appropriate as it might otherwise be.
Which actually speaks to, I think there's a real problem with obsolescence. The failing retail malls in the States have been an issue for a while, and they've been radically repurposed almost into new small towns. I think we're going to see out-of-town business parks, certain types of big box out-of-town retail, actually big toolboxes in the centre of cities, with the capacity of lifts and elevators being limited, have a big short-term problem. So I think there are some 20th century typologies throughout the real estate world that are really threatened, and I suspect we're actually going to have to start thinking about converting at least the upper floors of big, tall offices into residential with less frequent elevator traffic. As a result, maybe this is where mixed use actually starts to hit individual buildings as well as whole neighborhoods. But the money, the investment return is going to be made out of curating whole neighborhoods and really thinking about the productivity and prosperity of land.
And I think in doing that, I will keep coming back to vision, because everybody wants to keep changing planning. And I think the problem with planning is that you need vision, I think.
Yeah.
And I think if we can keep, and as I say, I think that's, to me, the message of this is we have to look forward and try and establish what it is we want as communities, and then see how we can deliver that through the built environment that is most appropriate, and how that links into all neighboring ones, which is a massive task. It's a massive task. But I mean, we can think in that kind of way, I think we have good prospects. If we don't think in that way, it might all go badly wrong.
I'm actually rather optimistic, because it'd be rather nice to see the decline of the clone high street and the emergence of individual character of cities, towns and neighbourhoods. You know, this is where, you know, you can almost think of it as the new localism. The time has come.
But you kind of see that in some towns. I mean, people talk of certain towns like Ludlow or whatever. They build themselves around a theme, if you like, and they become that, and that becomes interesting, and it brings in not just local, but it brings in people from outside, and just makes interesting places.
Yeah, I think we need to think, maybe behave a lot more like the hospitality industry in real estate, which is much more about the active, hands-on, moment-to-moment curation of places, and actually think about the visitor experience as a way of enhancing the residents and the local worker experience as well. They're all part of the whole. We've got to stop this sort of artificial separation that started with geographers in the
I think it's not just, it's also about how do people make money out of it, and what business models they use. We've got to completely rethink some of those, I'm sure, as well. So there's a lot of challenges out there anyway, but I'm with you. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic we can get this right, and hopefully it will.
With that optimism, it's probably a good time to finish it up. So hopefully you all enjoyed that, and thank you very much for tuning in.